They say home is where the heart is, safe, familiar, warm. But what happens when home becomes the hunting ground? When the locks don't hold, the walls don't protect, and shadows stretch far longer than they should. These stories aren't about distant haunted houses or cursed forests. They happened right inside bedrooms, kitchens, and basements, places we all believe are safe. You might think you're alone until you're not. Tonight, you'll hear 10 terrifying tales of being home alone, when something knocks at the door when someone's already inside, or when you realize the thing watching you isn't human. Story 1. Something knocked on Halloween night. It was the first Halloween I'd ever spent completely alone. I had just turned 18, and for once, my parents decided to take a long weekend trip, trusting me to hold down the fort while they explored a few properties out of town. I wasn't nervous. Actually, I was kind of excited. A house to myself, no siblings, no rules. It felt like a rite of passage. That afternoon, after a quick trip to the mall for some fall clothes, I got home around 3:30 and threw my bags on the couch. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens when no one else is home, not even a TV humming in the background. I slipped into my swimsuit and floated lazily in our backyard pool, letting the sun warm my face. Then my phone rang. It was Dad, reminding me that it was Halloween and I was now in charge of handing out candy. He chuckled, telling me to pull out the light-up pumpkin from the garage and set it by the palm tree out front like we used to. I promised I would, even joked that I'd be ready to fight off the zombies and werewolves myself. After the call, I got out of the pool and headed for the garage to find the battery-powered pumpkin Dad mentioned. I remembered it sitting on the top shelf just above the toolbox, and after a few minutes of searching, I spotted it. Dusty, but still intact. It was just out of reach, so I dragged over a wooden crate, stepped up and stretched onto my tiptoes. My fingers brushed the base of the pumpkin, and then everything tilted. The next moment came in flashes, the crate wobbling, the edge of the shelf digging into my ribs, the hard concrete rushing up. I hit the floor hard and everything went black. When I came to, I was still lying on the garage floor. My head throbbed, my vision was blurry, and I couldn't remember falling. Dazed, I pulled myself up slowly, leaning against the shelves for balance. That's when I saw it, blood. Fresh, dark red blood on my fingertips. Confused, I stumbled into the house, still unsure how long I'd been out or where the blood had come from. Still groggy and shaken, I shuffled into the kitchen, rinsed the blood from my fingers, and tried to piece together what had happened. I figured I must have hit my head on the way down and cut myself somewhere, but I couldn't find the wound. My reflection in the microwave door showed the skeleton makeup I'd applied earlier, but now smudged and streaked with something deeper than face paint. I felt a chill crawl across my skin. That's when the doorbell rang, jolting me. Trick-or-treaters, I thought. I grabbed the candy bowl from the counter and headed for the front door. 4 kids stood on the porch, 3 boys in zombie costumes with red-rimmed eyes and a girl dressed as a vampire with perfect white fangs. One of the boys squinted at me and said, "I like your fake blood, skeleton lady." I froze. I hadn't used any fake blood in my costume. I didn't respond, just dropped candy into their buckets with a forced smile. After they left, I sat down in the living room, feeling dizzy. My head throbbed again. I shut my eyes for what felt like a moment, until 3 loud, deliberate knocks jolted me awake. It was dark outside now, and the house suddenly felt too quiet, too still. The knocks came again. 3 harsh, echoing thuds that rattled the front door and sent vibrations crawling up my spine. No one knocks that hard on Halloween, I thought. There's a doorbell. I stood, heart pounding, and crept toward the hallway. That's when I noticed it. A cold draft seeping in from beneath the front door, unnaturally cold. I paused a few feet away, instincts screaming that something wasn't right. My skin prickled. The hairs on my arms stood straight. Then a third round of knocking, louder this time, almost urgent. I stepped forward, cautiously peering through the peephole. My breath hitched. Standing just beyond the porch lights, reach was a figure dressed in a long black cloak. The hood obscured its face entirely. No mask, no visible skin. Just a looming presence, tall, too tall, motionless. I whispered, "Nope," and turned to walk away, but then my right hand twitched. I didn't tell it to. It moved toward the deadbolt, and before I could stop myself, my fingers undid. The lock. Panic surged through me. My body moved without permission, like I was being puppeteered. My hand gripped the doorknob and twisted. The door swung open. The cloaked figure stood inches away now, a sour, rotting smell rolling off of it like smoke. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, just a whisper of breath. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, like I'd been sucked into a waking nightmare. My vision tunneled. Every part of me screamed to run, to close the door, to wake up. But all I could do was stand there frozen, until everything went black again. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't at the front door. I was lying on the living room couch, disoriented, with a blinding headache and a stinging sensation on the side of my skull. My parents were hovering over me, Mom pressing an ice pack to my forehead, Dad speaking urgently on the phone. I blinked, trying to focus, confused about how I'd gotten there. Mom explained I hadn't cleaned the head wound properly from earlier, and I'd suffered a mild concussion from the fall in the garage. They'd found me unconscious on the floor, with the front door wide open, makeup smeared, blood dried at my temple. I wanted to speak, to ask about the man in the cloak, but the words stuck in my throat. Had I imagined everything after the fall? Was the knocking real? The figure? The door opening? It felt so vivid, too vivid to dismiss. But they didn't see anyone. No one else had come to the house that night, at least no one they could see. I never told my parents what I saw. What would I even say? That something took control of me. That I opened the door to a faceless figure, and everything went black? They chalked it all up to the concussion, the fall, the stress of being home alone. Maybe they were right. But some nights when the house is too quiet and shadows stretch long across the walls, I still feel it, that same presence. I double-check every lock, but sometimes I wake up to the front door slightly ajar, even though I'm certain I secured. Halloween used to be my favorite time of year. Now I dread it, because deep down I can't shake the feeling that whatever stood on my porch that night never really left. Story 2. The Silent Phone Call. It was a rainy Friday evening in early winter, and the skies had been weeping all day. I was 16 then, old enough to be left alone, or so my parents thought. We'd just returned from my little brother's soccer tournament, where I spent most of the time shivering under an umbrella and questioning my entire existence. He thought it was hilarious to wipe his muddy shorts on my jeans on the way back. Classic sibling behavior. As soon as we got home, my parents told me they were going out for dinner, just the two of them. My brother had a sleepover planned at a friend's house, so I was left with an unexpected solo night in our countryside home. We lived on the outskirts of a small town in northeast Britain. It wasn't totally isolated, but our closest relatives, my aunt and grandmother, were still about a mile away in either direction. Our house creaked with age. The pipes hissed when the heat kicked in, and I always thought it felt just a little too quiet when no one else was around. I figured I'd make something simple for dinner, relax with some TV, and enjoy the silence. I had no idea what that night had in store. After a hot shower and a change into cozy pajamas, I padded downstairs and threw together a lazy dinner, something like beans on toast or a microwaved sandwich. I can't really remember. Outside, the rain was relentless, hammering against the windows like 1,000 tiny fingers. I turned on the TV and curled up on the couch, letting the flickering blue light fill the room. The hours slipped by quietly. and I started to forget that I was alone until the house phone rang. It startled me because no one ever used it. We all had mobiles and the landline hadn't rung in weeks. I let it go to voicemail, assuming it was some telemarketer or wrong number, but then through the speaker I heard breathing, slow, heavy, raspy. No words, just the sound of someone exhaling into the receiver. My chest tightened. I muted the TV, heart pounding, listening as the breathing continued for several seconds before the line cut out. I sat frozen, unsure whether to laugh it off or be afraid. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, kids messing around, or maybe even a crossed line. But less than a minute later, the phone rang again. My skin crawled. I didn't answer, but I stood beside the phone, listening to the voicemail in real time as it played through the speaker. More breathing. This time slower, wet, almost guttural. Then came a low grunt, followed by what sounded like someone dragging something heavy. The noise faded, replaced again by silence. Just that slow, rhythmic breathing, like the caller was standing right outside in the cold, fogging up the glass. My heart was racing. I backed away from the phone, feeling suddenly exposed. Every creak in the house seemed louder, every shadow deeper. Then my mobile vibrated in my pocket. I fumbled to pull it out. "Mum." I answered instantly. Her voice was frantic, trembling. "Layla, go to Grandma's right now. An ambulance is on the way." That was all she said. No time for questions. I grabbed my shoes, coat, and bolted out the door into the freezing rain, sprinting toward my grandmother's house. My legs burned and my mind reeled. Something was deeply wrong. I didn't know how bad until I got there. The rain felt like ice against my skin as I ran, my sneakers slapping against the wet pavement, heart pounding harder than my footsteps. Grandma's house was just under a mile away, but in that moment, it felt like crossing a continent. I kept replaying Mum's voice in my head, sharp, panicked, completely unlike her. Lights flickered through the mist as I neared the old brick house, and the red and white glow of an ambulance pierced through the dark. I burst into the driveway, lungs on fire, and saw two paramedics wheeling Grandma out on a stretcher. Her face was pale, eyes fluttering, mouth slightly open like she was trying to speak. My mum rushed to me, soaked through and shaking. "She had a stroke," she whispered. "She was alone for hours." That's when it hit me, the phone calls. I stammered, "Was it her who called the house?" Mum looked confused. "No, she managed to dial only 911 from the kitchen." But I knew what I'd heard. That heavy breathing, the dragging, the strange groans. My blood ran cold. Inside, I saw the kitchen phone dangling off the hook, a trail of blood smeared along the linoleum where Grandma must have crawled to reach it. I imagined her lying there, struggling to breathe, fighting to stay conscious. And while I'd been sitting on the couch, annoyed, debating whether to answer the phone, she had been calling for help in the only way she could. I'd ignored it. No haunting apparition. No ghost. Just a mistake that nearly cost someone I loved their life. Grandma survived the stroke, but just barely. The doctors said if she'd gotten to the phone even 10 minutes later, it might have been too late. She spent weeks in the hospital, then months in rehab learning how to walk and speak again. I visited often, and every time I saw her in that hospital bed, frail and quiet, I felt the weight of that missed call pressing down on me. I told myself it wasn't my fault. I didn't know. I couldn't have known. But some part of me kept replaying that moment, the way I stared at the ringing phone and chose to ignore it, the sound of that rasping breath on the voicemail. I used to think horror was about monsters and shadows and things that crept in the dark. But real horror is hearing someone gasp for help and doing nothing. I never told Grandma about the call. I just held her hand and apologized in silence. And I haven't ignored a ringing phone since. It's been years since that night, but the memory still lingers, quiet and sharp, like a thorn buried under the skin. My grandmother recovered, though she walks a little slower now and her voice carries a slight slur that wasn't there before. We don't talk about the stroke much. She never asked what happened that night, and I've never volunteered the truth. But every now and then when I visit and the landline rings, she gives me this look, half knowing, half kind. I always answer now. Doesn't matter if it's a scam call or dead air, I pick up, because I know what it means to hesitate. That night taught me that real fear isn't just about what you see or hear. Sometimes it's about what you fail to notice, and sometimes it's the silence that haunts you most. Story 3. The Thing Outside the Window. That night felt like any other. I was home alone again, something that had become routine since my parents worked late and my older sister practically lived at her boyfriend's place. I didn't mind the solitude, really. I was used to it. After coming home from work, I fed the cat, reheated some leftover pasta, and collapsed on the couch with my phone. Our house was quiet, uncomfortably so. Even the hum of the air conditioner had gone silent, which struck me as odd. The stillness made the creaks in the floorboards and distant ticking of the hallway clock feel unusually loud. Our porch light was off, but the curtains were always drawn tight, especially on the front window, partially blocked by a tall dresser that no one ever bothered to move. I chalked it up to poor layout and lazy furniture placement. It was getting close to 9 p.m., and I figured I'd just relax until the rest of the family trickled back in. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing to fear. But I hadn't noticed the sound yet, soft and distant at first, like something shifting on the gravel outside. I thought it was the neighbor's kids, until it didn't go away. At first I didn't think much of it, the shifting noise outside. Our neighbors had a couple of wild kids who often played too close to our yard, and it wasn't unusual for their toys or balls to end up on our porch. But something about this sound felt different. It wasn't fast, chaotic, childlike movement. It was slow, deliberate. I muted my phone and leaned in, trying to pinpoint it. The footsteps, or whatever they were, crunched across the gravel, circling the house. That's when the unease settled in. Our house sits slightly elevated on a slope, and from where I was sitting, the front window was above my head. To see anything through it, someone would have to be standing on the slanted lawn, and they'd have to be tall. Really tall. I stayed perfectly still as the noise grew closer. Then I saw it, just a glimpse, a shadow moving past the edge of the curtains, followed by the unmistakable shape of a forehead pressing against the upper part of the window. No sound, no voice, just a silent presence, impossibly tall, watching. I sank deeper into the couch, heart thudding so loudly it seemed to echo in the silence. Whoever or whatever was out there hadn't moved away. I could still make out the faint, motionless shape through the curtain, the pale stretch of forehead barely visible above the windowsill. The fact that I couldn't see the eyes or the rest of the face only made it worse. Was it leaning down? Watching? I dared not move. Then, without warning, it shifted. Quiet footsteps on gravel moving around the side of the house. I bolted into the kitchen, pressing myself against the wall beneath a smaller window, out of sight. I tried to call my mom, but the signal dropped. My cat remained asleep in the other room, utterly unaware. I heard the heavy steps again, this time on the back porch, a soft creak of the wooden planks. Then, a rattle. The door to the laundry room. It was locked, we never used it, but the handle jiggled again and again, slow at first, then more forcefully. And just like that, the noise stopped. Complete silence. But I could feel it. It was still there, waiting. The silence was somehow louder than the rattling had been. I crouched in the space between the kitchen and the hallway, the cold tiles pressing against my knees, ears straining for any sign of movement. Then I heard it. Heavy, deliberate steps. Again, this time circling the house toward the back porch stairs. I moved slowly, silently up the staircase toward the second floor, avoiding every creaking board I could remember from childhood. At the top, I ducked into the shadows beside my sister's room and waited, forcing my breath to stay quiet. My heart pounded so hard I was sure it would give me away. I peeked through the narrow blinds of the hallway window, and there it was, standing just below me, not moving, not searching, just staring, facing the wall beside our back door, one hand resting on the cellar door handle as if it had every right to be there. In the dim porch light, I could finally see more. The skin was pale, almost grayish, stretched tightly over sharp bones. Its limbs were too long, too thin, and its head, bald, faceless. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, empty skin. It tilted its head slightly, as though it had heard something, or smelled something. Me. I ducked back. My hands shook violently. I didn't know what this thing was or how it got there. All I knew was that it hadn't tried to break in yet. Not forcefully. It was patient. And that terrified me more than if it had smashed a window. Because something that waits and something that studies is something that plans. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. Moving as quietly as I could, I crept down the hall and into my parents' bedroom, shutting the door gently behind me. I knew I wouldn't be safe if it decided to enter, but at least the windows there were smaller, harder to see through. I crouched beside the bed, phone in hand, trying again to call Mom. This time it connected. I whispered, barely audible, telling her someone was outside, something. She said she was 5 minutes away. I just had to hold on. I stayed hidden, shaking, listening for movement. For a while, there was nothing, until I heard the creak of porch steps and the soft rattle of the cellar door one last time, then silence. When my mom got home, headlights sweeping across the yard, I ran to her the moment the front door opened. We checked the house together. Nothing. No footprints. No damage. Just a quiet house and a wide-open cellar door swinging gently in the wind. But I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't human. I never told my mom the full story. How could I explain the thing I saw? Faceless, tall, deliberate. She wouldn't have believed me anyway. No one would. The next morning I checked the yard, hoping to find some evidence, footprints, broken branches, anything. But the rain had washed it all away, just an empty cellar door swinging in the breeze. I started sleeping with my door locked and a chair propped beneath the knob. Some nights I wake up convinced I hear something moving on the gravel outside, pacing slowly in circles. I never look. I don't want to see it again, but I know it remembers me. Whatever it was, it didn't come to break in. It came to observe and to remind me that not all visitors knock. Some just watch and wait. Story 4. The Figure Behind the Curtain. I was around 11 or 12 when it happened, staying over at my best friend's house in New Zealand. We weren't just close. We were inseparable, spending every weekend together before school eventually pulled us in different directions. That weekend was supposed to be just like the others. Movies, junk food, and sleeping bags on the floor. Her house was small but cozy. A single-story place with the living room, dining area, and kitchen forming one open space, while the bedroom sat in a quieter, darker wing of the house. It was early December, the Southern Hemisphere's version of summer, and the moon was high and full, casting a soft glow over the streets. After dinner with her family, we decided to build a blanket fort in the living room. It was a masterpiece by our standards, with our feet sticking out the end and fairy lights tangled across the top. Her parents and little sister went to bed early, leaving us giggling and whispering about beach trips and cartoons. Everything felt light, fun, safe. But sometime after midnight, something shifted. It began with a glance out the window, and the feeling that someone or something was already looking in. We were huddled inside our blanket fort, the warm orange glow from the kitchen nightlight casting soft shadows on the living room walls. My friend was telling a funny story when I glanced toward the uncovered window. That's when I saw it. Something tall, bulky, just standing outside. At first I thought it was a trick of the moonlight or a tree swaying, but it wasn't moving. Not exactly. I nudged my friend and pointed. She froze. Her family hadn't installed blinds on that window, so anyone outside could easily see in. The streetlight was too far to help, but the moonlight made the shape visible. It looked almost like a person, except it wasn't. It was too large, too still, and its features were hard to make out. The snout, the ears, the outline of fur. My friend tried to brush it off, said it must be a neighbor or maybe a prank. But neither of us moved for several minutes. We just sat there listening to the silence, pretending everything was fine, while something stood on the other side of the glass, watching. We couldn't tear our eyes away from the window. The thing outside didn't move. It just stood there, half lit by moonlight, its sharp silhouette outlined against the glass. It looked like a man, tall and broad, but its head was unmistakably wrong. Elongated, animal-like, a snout. My friend whispered, "It looks like a wolf," and for a second I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't. Its eyes, glowing or maybe just catching the light, seemed to lock with mine, not curious, not confused, just aware. Still, we tried to rationalize it. We turned on the kitchen light to break the tension, but that only made it harder to see outside. So we turned it off again. I remember how our little fort felt suddenly paper-thin, like a joke. We sat side by side, knees pulled to our chests, peeking out. Then it turned its head toward me. That was when fear truly sank in. It hadn't just been standing there. It had been staring at us the whole time, watching, waiting. We ducked down inside the fort, clutching each other. The creature was real, and it knew we were there, so I couldn't stop shaking. We crouched in the darkness of the blanket fort, barely breathing, ears straining for the sound of movement outside. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no scratching. Just silence, thick and humming with dread. I couldn't stand it anymore. I crawled out and made a dash for the kitchen to check the clock. It was nearly 2 a.m. The house felt like a tomb. My friend followed close behind, neither of us speaking. We switched on the warm kitchen light, its glow spilling faintly into the living room, and turned back toward the window. The thing was gone. For a brief, foolish moment, I felt relief, until I noticed the back porch light flicker on. My heart dropped. We backed away from the window and pressed ourselves against the far wall. Then, slow and deliberate, we heard the creaking of the back steps. 1, 2, 3, then a pause. My friend whispered, "It's here." We bolted. Across the room, ducking behind the couch, barely daring to look. The porch light flickered again, then died. That was when we saw it, standing by the window, closer than before. Its body was massive, muscles bulging under thick fur, but its legs bent at strange angles like they were broken and reset wrong. Its face, a horrifying blend of human and wolf, snarled as it breathed, fogging the glass. Its teeth gleamed under the moonlight. It was looking inside, at us. We didn't scream. We didn't move. It didn't need to get in to scare us. It already had. It raised one clawed hand, slowly tapped the window once, and then it was gone. The moment it vanished, we scrambled back into our makeshift fort, our childish creation now our only refuge. We didn't speak. We just lay there, trembling, waiting for any sign of footsteps tapping or breathing, but none came. Eventually the exhaustion caught up to us, and sometime before sunrise, we passed out in that tight, fabric-draped cocoon. When morning came, the world looked painfully normal. Sunlight spilled into the room, warming the carpet where the creature had once stood. We peeked outside cautiously. There were no footprints, no scratches, no broken glass. Just a calm, cloudless sky and a sleepy street. We didn't tell her parents. We didn't even tell each other the full truth. We packed up the blankets, brushed off the fear, and pretended it never happened. But something unspoken lingered between us. Later, when I mentioned it offhand, my friend simply shook her head. "We didn't see anything," she said, voice flat. "But I know what I saw. And I know that some things don't need to break in to leave a mark. They just need to look." We never spoke of it again. Not to her parents, not to our classmates, not even to each other. As we grew older and drifted apart, the memories stayed, buried, until one night years later I found myself walking alone past a darkened house, and I felt that same pressure, that same instinct to look over my shoulder. I didn't want to know if something was watching. Even now I sometimes dream of that night. The window, the moonlight, the creature's eyes reflecting white like distant headlights. I wonder what it was. A shapeshifter, a werewolf, a skinwalker, or something far older, something that visits when we're most vulnerable and least likely to be believed. Whatever it was, I'm glad it stayed outside. But a part of me still wonders, what if it had decided to come in? Story 5. The Man in the Closet. It was supposed to be just another relaxing weekend at my friend John's new place. He'd recently moved across town into an older house with a partially finished basement. Nothing fancy, but it had space, and, more importantly, he had a spare bed down there for me to crash on while helping him move furniture. We spent the entire Saturday hauling boxes, setting up shelves, and rearranging his living room. It was the kind of exhausting day that left you sore in the best way. By evening, we were too tired to bother finishing the job, so he offered me the basement bed for the night. I agreed without hesitation. The basement was cool and quiet, the walls bare and the light dim. But the bed was surprisingly comfortable, and after a long shower and a late night snack, I climbed under the blankets and let the exhaustion carry me away. The last thing I remember was John's voice calling down, "Let me know if you need anything, man." I chuckled and told him good night. I didn't know that in just a few hours I'd be waking up to something far less friendly than my best friend. Sometime in the middle of the night, I stirred, not fully awake, just hovering between dreams and consciousness. That's when I heard it. Faint, irregular noises, a light scraping sound, and maybe plastic shifting against concrete. I opened my eyes to darkness. The basement had no windows, and the soft glow from the hallway upstairs was gone. I sat up slowly, trying to place the sound. It seemed to come from the far corner, beneath the staircase, or maybe behind the water heater. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a mouse or the house settling, but something about it didn't feel random. The movement stopped whenever I focused on it, and resumed the moment I relaxed again. I reached over and turned on the small lamp beside the bed. The light spilled weakly into the room, but revealed nothing unusual. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't entirely alone down there. The air felt heavier than before, dense and quiet. Too quiet. I lay back down, pretending not to care, but I didn't fall asleep again. Morning couldn't come fast enough, but somehow I drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. When I woke up, sunlight filtered through the narrow basement door at the top of the stairs. John was already moving around upstairs. I joined him for coffee and casually brought up the noises. He looked surprised. "I heard stuff too," he admitted, rubbing his eyes, "but I thought it was just you getting up for water or something." We both laughed it off, but a strange silence lingered between us. Later that afternoon, while carrying the last of his boxes into the basement, one slipped from my arms and crashed to the floor. As I knelt to pick it up, I noticed something, an odd metal handle jutting from the floor in the far corner, partially hidden beneath the stairs. I called John over, and together we examined it. The handle wasn't decorative. It was attached to a square panel flush with the concrete. With a hesitant pull, it lifted, revealing a dark, narrow crawl space. Inside were a few water bottles, a sleeping bag, and the faint smell of sweat and damp clothing. Someone had been living down there, watching, listening, while we'd been working and while I slept. The moment we saw the sleeping bag and empty water bottles, a chill passed between us. We exchanged a look that said everything neither of us dared to speak. Someone had been living in the house, inside the basement crawl space, just feet away from where I had slept. The narrow space extended farther than we first realized, disappearing into shadow. "No way," John muttered, his voice tight. He reached for his phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it inside. That's when we saw it. At the far end of the crawl space, two eyes reflected the light. Not animal eyes, human. Someone was crouched in the darkness, unmoving, watching us. My stomach turned ice cold. "Hey!" John shouted, but the figure didn't move. It just stared. A moment later, it began to shift, slowly, deliberately crawling backward, deeper into the dark. I felt my chest tighten with panic. Whoever that was, they had no intention of coming out. They weren't surprised. They were retreating like they'd done this before. John slammed the hatch shut and dragged a heavy shelf over it while I called the police. Officers arrived within 10 minutes, but by the time they opened the crawl space again, it was empty. No person, no sleeping bag, nothing but dirt, dampness, and the faint imprint of knees where someone had crouched for hours, maybe days. They searched the house, the yard, even nearby streets, but no one was ever found. That night I didn't go back to John's house, and he never spent another night in the basement. Whatever had been down there, it had known we were coming. We didn't wait around after the crawl space was found empty. John packed a duffel bag while I stood watch by the front door, every creak of the old house sounding sharper, more menacing than before. The police assured us they'd continue to investigate, but the way they exchanged looks told me they didn't expect to find anything, or anyone. Whatever had been hiding under the stairs had slipped away too easily, like it knew the layout better than we did. John decided to stay at his sister's place for a while, and I went straight home, double-checking every lock before crawling into bed, wide-eyed and wired. We never found out how long that person had been living in his house. Days, weeks? Had they been there before he even moved in? The worst part wasn't that someone had been there. It was how silent, how patient, how intentional they were. No break-ins, no threats, just quiet observation from the shadows, and the knowledge that sometimes you're not alone even when you think you are. Weeks passed and the police never found the intruder. No prints, no signs of forced entry, just that cold, empty crawl space. John eventually put the house up for sale, unable to shake the feeling that someone might still be watching. We both tried to laugh it off when friends asked about the basement guy, but deep down, it lingered. I still wake up sometimes at night, remembering the eyes silent, calculating from the dark. It wasn't just fear I felt that night. It was the realization that someone had studied us, waited patiently beneath our feet, and vanished like they were never there. To this day, I check every closet, every crawl space, every corner before I sleep, because I know better now. The most terrifying things don't always break in. Sometimes they're already inside. Story 6. Knocks from the basement. When I was 10 years old, I spent a weekend at my best friend Robert's house. We were practically inseparable, always riding bikes, trading Pokemon cards, or staying up late playing video games. That weekend, Robert's dad was out of town for business, which meant no bedtime curfews and free rein over snacks and the TV. His mum made us pizza, and after dinner we raced upstairs to his room, battling it out on the console until we could barely keep our eyes open. Eventually, Robert's mom came in, smiling but firm, and told us it was time for bed. Robert climbed into his bed, and I set up my sleeping bag on the floor beside him. The house was quiet, dimly lit by the hallway light seeping under the door. I remember feeling safe, just two kids in a suburban home, surrounded by familiar walls and warm voices. We whispered about school and video game levels until sleep pulled us under. But sometime in the night, I woke up. Groggy and confused, I opened my eyes and saw a dark figure standing in the hallway, still as stone. At the time, I thought it was Robert's dad, but the next morning I realized that was impossible. At first, I convinced myself I had been dreaming. I blinked a few times and sat up slightly, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. The figure was gone. Maybe it had never been there at all. I lay back down, trying to shake the chill that had crept over me. Morning came with the smell of cereal and cartoons playing downstairs. Robert acted like everything was normal, and for a while I almost forgot what I'd seen. It wasn't until his mom casually mentioned that Robert's dad was still out of town that my stomach dropped. I told Robert about the figure in the hallway, but he just shrugged and said, maybe I'd imagined it. I wanted to believe that too. But when we went to the basement later that day, where they kept a spare guest room, I noticed something strange. The door to the room was cracked open, and the air felt cold and stale. I stepped inside and saw that the bed was a mess, blankets crumpled and tossed like someone had been sleeping there. Robert froze. That room's supposed to be empty, he whispered. Robert stood behind me, staring into the disheveled guest room as if seeing it for the first time. My mum keeps this door shut. We haven't used this room in months, he said, voice low. The air inside was musty, carrying a strange metallic tang. I stepped closer and noticed the window was unlocked, the curtain slightly pushed aside as if someone had recently peered out. The sense of unease I'd felt the night before came roaring back. It hadn't been a dream. Someone had been in the house. We checked every room after that. The attic, the closets, the garage. Nothing seemed out of place until we returned to the guest room later that evening and found the door wide open again. This time the pillow was on the floor and a damp towel had appeared near the corner. Robert ran to get his mum, and when she came down, her face went pale. She didn't say much, just quietly shut the door and told us to stay upstairs for the rest of the night. Neither of us slept well. Every creak and distant sound felt loaded with threat, and deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been there hadn't left. Later that night I woke up again. The hallway was pitch black. Robert's mom must have turned the light off. I was lying on the floor in my sleeping bag, and something felt wrong. The air felt too still, the silence too perfect. Then I heard it, a floorboard creaking just beyond the bedroom door. Not the casual creak of a shifting house, but a slow, deliberate pressure, step by step. I sat up, barely breathing. Robert was still asleep in his bed, facing the wall. I stared, at the door, frozen. Then I saw the shadow pass by, slow, long, unmistakably human. It paused just outside, and for a terrifying moment I thought it would open the door, but instead the shadow moved again, and the floor creaked once more. Time headed down the stairs. I couldn't take it. I crawled out of my sleeping bag and crept to the bedroom door, opening it just a crack. I peeked out into the hallway and saw the basement door swinging shut. Someone had just gone down there. I turned to Robert, whispering his name. He groggily woke and when I told him what I saw, his eyes went wide with fear. We tiptoed to his mom's room, knocked, and told her everything. She didn't question us this time. She went downstairs, locked the basement door from the inside, and called the police. When they arrived and searched the basement thoroughly, they found an open window in the guest room and muddy footprints, leading from it straight to the staircase. Someone had been staying there, someone who walked the halls at night, and for days none of us even knew. After the police left, Robert's mom insisted we stay in her room for the rest of the night. The three of us huddled in silence, barely sleeping, jumping at every small sound the house made. The officers had assured us that the person was likely gone. Whoever it was must have escaped out the window when they heard the commotion. But that didn't bring much comfort. The thought that someone had been walking right past us at night, breathing the same air, made my skin crawl. The next morning, Robert's mom called a locksmith and had the locks changed on every door and window. She nailed the basement window shut and put a deadbolt on the guest room. As for me, I packed up my things and went home early, grateful to leave that house behind. Robert and I still hung out, but I never stayed over again. And to this day, whenever I'm alone in a house, I check the guest rooms, especially the ones no one uses. Because if someone could live undetected in that one, they could be anywhere. Years have passed, but that sleepover still haunts me in ways I didn't expect. Not because anything violent happened, but because it almost did. Because someone, for who knows how long, lived quietly in the dark beneath our feet. Every now and then I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up, if we hadn't checked that room. The thought that someone watched us sleep, walked the same halls and left without a trace still chills me. Robert eventually moved away, and we lost touch, but I sometimes think he remembers it too. It changed how I see safety, how I view the quiet corners of homes. Now every creak makes me listen closer. Every shadow makes me pause, because the most terrifying stories don't always come with screams. Sometimes they come with silence. Story 7. He got in anyway. It was a typical Friday night, and I was staying at my grandma's house while my parents went out of town for a wedding. I was 16 at the time, old enough to stay by myself, but they still didn't like the idea of leaving me completely alone. My grandmother lived just a couple of blocks away from our house in a quiet, peaceful neighborhood, the kind of place where nothing ever really happened. Her home was cozy, filled with the scent of old books and lavender, and she kept it neat in the way only grandmas seemed to manage. That evening, after dinner, she went to bed early as usual, leaving me to watch TV alone in the living room. Rain tapped gently against the windows, and I wrapped myself in a throw blanket, flipping between channels until I settled on some late-night comedy reruns. My phone buzzed occasionally, but I ignored it, enjoying the calm. The house creaked softly with age, but it wasn't anything new. I'd always liked the sound. It made the place feel alive in a comforting way. I didn't know yet that the next few hours would unravel everything I believed about safety, comfort, and being alone. Around 10:30 p.m., I got up to grab some water from the kitchen. As I passed the hallway that led to the front door, I thought I saw movement. Just a slight shift, like a shadow pulling away from the curtain. I paused, stared, but saw nothing. I told myself it was the reflection from the TV or maybe headlights from a car turning down the road. Still, I made sure the door was locked and double-checked the deadbolt, even though I was almost certain Grandma had already done it. When I returned to the couch, I noticed that the porch light, which had been on all evening, was now off. I tried the switch next to the door, but it didn't respond. I flicked it up and down. Nothing. The bulb must have blown, I figured. No big deal. I sat back down, but the air felt heavier now, as if the room had changed. My eyes kept darting to the front windows, drawn by a feeling I couldn't explain. That sense that someone or something was nearby, just out of sight. I tried to focus on the show, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My eyes kept drifting toward the dark window near the front of the house, where the porch light used to glow. The rain had started coming down harder, tapping like fingers against the glass. Then, without warning, the TV flickered and went black. So did the lamp beside me. A power outage. Great! I sat in the dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of my phone screen. That's when I heard it. A soft creak from the front porch, not the wind, not the house. Something or someone was moving out there. I stood up slowly, heart racing, and tiptoed toward the window, keeping to the edge of the wall. When I peeked out, my breath caught. There, just at the edge of the porch, was a figure, tall, unmoving, cloaked in the shadows. I couldn't make out a face, but I knew it was looking directly at the house. I stumbled back, phone in hand, dialing Grandma's number. No answer. I whispered her name, but the house felt impossibly silent. I wasn't just being watched anymore. Whoever was out there, they were waiting for something. I backed away from the window, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The figure hadn't moved, but something about its stillness was worse than if it had, like it had all the time in the world. I rushed down the hallway to my grandma's bedroom, whispering her name again. I opened the door gently. She was fast asleep, her breathing deep and even. I didn't want to scare her, but I needed to tell someone. Before I could shake her awake, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of the porch step creaking under weight. Someone was approaching the front door. I tiptoed back toward the living room, just in time to see the brass doorknob twitch, not once, twice, then a soft, deliberate click. They were testing the lock. I ducked behind the couch, clutching my phone with trembling fingers. No signal, no Wi-Fi. I held my breath, every nerve alert, praying the deadbolt would hold. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, it wasn't rushed, it was calm. 3 slow taps, like the person on the other side wanted me to open the door, not fear it. I stayed hidden, afraid even to blink. Then, silence. Long, agonizing silence. Peeked slowly over the couch. The figure was gone. I crawled to the front window and looked out into the rain-soaked yard. Nothing. And then, just as I turned to retreat, I saw movement. At the far end of the hallway, inside the house, my blood turned to ice. Whoever had been at the door. They weren't outside anymore. I didn't have time to think. I bolted down the hallway toward my grandma's room, my bare feet slipping slightly on the hardwood floor. I burst through her door and shook her awake, frantic, whispering, "Someone's in the house." Her eyes flew open, and she sat up just as we heard a floorboard creak in the hallway outside. She didn't question me. She grabbed the landline beside her bed and called the police with shaking hands, whispering into the receiver as I locked the bedroom door and wedged a chair beneath the handle. We heard footsteps approaching, slow, deliberate, heavy. They paused outside the door. I could hear breathing. Then a single knock. This time it was harder, more demanding. My grandma clutched my hand as the sirens in the distance began to wail. The knock came again, louder, but then nothing. Silence. When the police arrived minutes later, they searched the house from top to bottom. Every window and door was still locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry, and no one was ever found. The police never found any trace of the intruder. No fingerprints, no footprints, nothing to explain how someone could have been inside a locked house. They suggested I was dreaming or confused, but I know what I saw. My grandmother believed me. She installed new locks, motion lights, even a security system. Still, she moved out within a month, saying the house didn't feel like hers anymore. As for me, I stopped staying anywhere alone. That night changed something in me. How I view silence, how I trust shadows. I used to think danger came with noise, with chaos, but now I know better. Real fear is quiet. It waits, it watches, and sometimes it walks straight through locked doors without ever needing a key. Story 8. The House That Watches. I was around 10 when I got invited to a sleepover at my friend David's house. We weren't especially close. He was new to our school and had only transferred in that year. But he seemed nice enough, quiet. A little odd maybe, but not in a bad way. I remember being surprised that he asked me over at all. We'd only spoken a few times in class, but something in his voice when he asked made it hard to say no. Maybe he was lonely, or maybe he just didn't have many friends yet. My mom drove me to his house after school on Friday. It was a large 2-story home that looked normal from the outside. Neatly trimmed hedges, clean brick walls, and a porch swing that creaked gently in the breeze. Inside, David showed me his room. Walls covered in superhero posters, shelves lined with action figures and strange old toys I didn't recognize. We played video games, laughed a bit, and everything seemed fine. But as the evening wore on and the house settled into silence, something about the place started to feel off. The corners of rooms felt darker than they should have. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. Later that night, after dinner with David and his mother, who barely spoke and kept glancing at the hallway like she was waiting for something, we headed back to his room. David suddenly grew quieter, more serious. He asked if I ever felt like someone was watching me when I was alone. I gave a nervous laugh, unsure if he was joking. Then he said, "They always come when the house is quiet." I thought he was trying to scare me, but his tone wasn't playful. It was flat, grim. We got ready for bed and I rolled out my sleeping bag on the floor. The lights went off and almost immediately I felt it, a change in the room, a weight in the air. From the corner, where the wall met the ceiling, came a soft creaking sound. I sat up, straining my eyes in the dark, but saw nothing. David whispered, "Don't look too long. If you see it, it sees you back." I wanted to laugh it off, but my mouth felt dry, and something about the shadows in that room suddenly felt wrong. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept my eyes shut, trying to will myself into dreaming, but I couldn't stop thinking about what David had said. The house was too quiet. No creaks from the pipes, no hum from appliances. Just stillness. Then came a soft sound, like paper being dragged across wood. I opened my eyes. The shadows in the corner of the room looked deeper now, almost liquid, like they were pooling rather than falling naturally from the ceiling light. I stared longer than I meant to, and that's when I saw something move. It wasn't big. A shape, crouched near the corner, almost spider-like. At first I thought it was a pile of clothes or a trick of the light, but then it shifted, slowly, fluidly. It extended a limb or something like a limb across the floor. I blinked hard, and it was gone. David hadn't moved. I whispered his name, but he didn't respond. I grabbed my flashlight from my backpack and shined it toward the corner. Nothing, just a wall and shadow. Then, just as I exhaled in relief, I noticed something chilling. Scratch marks, deep, uneven, carved into the wood of the closet door, and they were fresh. I stood frozen, flashlight trembling in my grip. The scratch marks weren't random, they formed a pattern like symbols or letters etched by something with claws. My breath caught when I realized they weren't only on the closet door, they were above it, on the walls, even on the ceiling. David still hadn't moved. He lay on his side, facing the wall, breathing shallowly like he was pretending to be asleep. I whispered again, louder this time, "David." No answer. Then I heard it. A clicking sound, soft but unnatural, like bones tapping against wood. It came from behind me. I turned slowly. The corner of the room, the one where the shadows had moved earlier, was darker now, impossibly dark, as if light refused to touch it. And then something stepped out from it. Or maybe it unfolded. Its limbs were too long, joints bent the wrong way, and it had no eyes. Only smooth, pale skin stretched tight over a twisted face. Its mouth was too wide, open in a silent grin. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. The creature moved toward David, crouching beside his bed, tilting its head as if studying him. That's when David opened his eyes, tears spilling down his cheeks, and whispered without looking at me, "Don't run. If you run, it follows." But I couldn't help it. I bolted for the door, yanking it open, not caring how loud I was. I didn't stop until I was outside, barefoot on the cold grass, panting under the moonlight. I looked back at the window and saw it watching me from the dark. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing at the edge of a neighbor's yard. My lungs burned, my feet were scraped raw, and my heart wouldn't stop hammering. Lights flicked on in the house I had stumbled toward, and a man came outside, confused, concerned. I managed to blurt out something about a boy, a creature, the house. He called the police, and I waited trembling on the porch, too afraid to even look back down the street. When the authorities arrived, I led them back to David's home, but everything looked normal. The front door was locked, no sign of forced entry, no marks on the walls or floors, and no David. His mother claimed she hadn't seen him since dinner. The guest room where we had slept was spotless. I told them what I saw, but it sounded insane. I knew it did. Still, I never saw David again. He vanished that night. And sometimes, when I wake up at 3 a.m., I swear I hear that same soft clicking just outside my window. Years have passed, but I still remember every detail from that night. The weight of the air, the smell of dust and fear, the way David whispered without hope in his voice. No one ever found him. The case went cold, and eventually people stopped asking questions. But I didn't. I've done my research, quietly, obsessively. Stories of creatures that exist in silence, that mark their territory with symbols no one understands. Beings that don't haunt places, they haunt people. I never told anyone about the final nightmare I had, a dream where I stood frozen as David stared at me from a corner, his mouth wide open, but saying nothing. Behind him, the thing was still there, waiting, watching. I don't go to sleepovers anymore, and I never ever sleep with the closet door open. Story 9. The Wrong Reflection. It was the fall of 1997 when my family moved to a small mountain town in Colorado. I was 13, and everything felt like a fresh start. We'd left behind the noise and traffic of Denver for a quieter life in a rented cabin tucked deep into the woods. The place felt like something out of a postcard. Pine trees towering over narrow dirt roads, crisp air that smelled like sap and soil, and the distant calls of owls echoing through the valleys at night. The closest neighbor was a good 20-minute drive away, and the nearest store even farther. My dad worked nights in a nearby town, so it was usually just Mom and me at the cabin. She homeschooled me back then, which meant we had long days to ourselves, reading, doing lessons, cooking simple meals, and occasionally hiking the trails behind the house. I liked the quiet, mostly. It gave me time to think and dream. But sometimes, the silence stretched too far, like it was waiting to be broken. I didn't know then that our peaceful escape would become the setting for one of the most terrifying nights of my life. A night that still follows me. It started with little things, barely noticeable at first. One evening while washing dishes, I glanced up and thought I saw movement just beyond the tree line. A flicker, maybe a deer or a shadow. I mentioned it to Mom, and she shrugged it off as wildlife. But the next night I heard what sounded like footsteps outside our kitchen window. Slow, deliberate. When I rushed to look, there was nothing there, just the dark woods and our empty front porch. Then came the lights. Not bright, not like headlights or flashlights, more like a soft pulsing glow far in the distance between the trees. They would flicker on, pulse once or twice, then vanish. I asked Mom about them, and she just gave me a tired smile and said, "It's probably just hunters." But we were miles from any hunting trail. Even the forest began to feel different. The birds didn't sing as much. The breeze carried a strange metallic scent, and at night I'd wake up certain that something was watching us from the woods. Not an animal, something else. One night, while my mum was finishing up laundry, the power cut out. Not just a flicker. Everything went dark and stayed that way. The silence was complete. Even the usual forest sounds, the wind rustling the trees, the distant chirp of insects, were gone. I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the living room to find some candles. That's when I noticed the back door was slightly ajar. I was sure we'd locked it. I called for Mum, but she didn't answer right away. Then I heard it. A faint knock. Not at the front door, but from the side of the cabin, against the wall, followed by another knock on the opposite side, like someone or multiple someones was circling the house. I froze. My flashlight beam trembled as I swept it across the dark corners of the room. That's when Mum appeared, pale, holding a kitchen knife. "Don't say anything," she whispered. I heard them too. We turned off the flashlight and crouched together behind the couch. More knocks followed. Not loud, just curious. They moved from wall to wall, like something was probing, testing. Then in the silence came the worst sound of all, the creak of the front porch step. The creak on the porch was followed by another, then another. Whatever was out there wasn't in a hurry. It walked slowly, deliberately, like it knew we were listening. Mom gripped my hand tightly, her other still clutching the knife. We didn't breathe. The porch floor groaned once more, then silence. I thought maybe it had left. Then came the sound of the doorknob turning. Click, click, click. It wasn't locked. I'd forgotten to check it. I lunged forward in the dark, slamming the deadbolt just as the knob fully turned. A heavy thud shook the door from the other side, as if something massive had slammed against it. Not to break it, but to test us. I pulled back, heart pounding, as the shadow beneath the door shifted. There was no shuffling, no growl, just presence. Watching, waiting. Then, impossibly, the bathroom light at the end of the hallway flicked on. It hadn't worked since the power went out. Mom and I turned our heads slowly toward it and saw a figure standing in the doorway. Not outside, inside, tall, too tall. Its skin was pale, waxy, like stretched leather, limbs too long, joints angled wrong, like it had been pieced together without instructions. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, watching us. From the light, it shouldn't have been able to turn on. Mom stepped forward with the knife, voice trembling. "You're not welcome here." And in response, it smiled, a thin, lipless grin that stretched across its face like it had been carved there. That's when the power surged back on, and the thing vanished. The moment the lights came back on, Mom grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the front door. We didn't check for the figure, didn't speak, didn't stop to collect anything. She flung the door open, and we bolted across the porch into the freezing night air, sprinting toward the truck parked under the trees. I glanced back just once, just in time to see the hallway light turn off again, and the faintest shadow retreat from the window. The truck roared to life, and Mom reversed so fast we nearly hit a tree. We drove for miles in silence until we reached the nearest gas station, shaking, breathless, and unable to explain what had just happened. When we returned with deputies the next day, the cabin was undisturbed. No scratch marks, no footprints, no malfunctioning power grid. But something had changed. The silence around the property felt deeper, watchful, like the woods themselves were listening. We never spent another night there, and to this day I still lock every door, even the ones that no one's ever used. We left the cabin behind that winter and never returned. My dad didn't ask many questions. Maybe he sensed that we wouldn't be able to explain what happened in a way that made sense. Over time, life returned to normal on the surface, but something in me never quite settled. Sometimes late at night, I'll wake with the memory of that grin burned into my mind. Inhuman, too wide, like it was wearing a human face as a joke. I've read stories about things in the woods, spirits, mimics, forgotten creatures that prey on silence and isolation. Whatever visited us that night wasn't just a trick of the dark. It was real. I still wonder why it chose us, or why it let us go, and worst of all, I wonder if it ever really left. Story 10. The Whistle in the Dark. I was 11 when I spent the summer with my cousins in a remote part of New Mexico on a small native reservation surrounded by dense woodland and mesas. My cousins, Elena, Darren, and Lucas, were around, my age, and the four of us bonded quickly. Days were spent playing soccer in dusty fields or riding our bikes through narrow, sun-baked trails. Nights were for stories the adults whispered after dark, about spirits that wandered the land, about things that mimicked voices in the woods, and about creatures you should never name out loud. I was a city kid, skeptical and curious, and though their tales gave me goosebumps, I chalked them up to folklore. Elena was the bold one. She told us we were old enough to find out what was real for ourselves. Darren and Lucas didn't need much convincing. One evening, with the sun dipping behind the hills and casting long shadows across the ground, we made a pact. No more bedtime stories. We'd sneak out and camp near the old arroyo, the place the elders warned us not to go. It was supposed to be a night of bravery, of proving we weren't kids anymore. We were so wrong. The arroyo looked harmless enough at first, a dry, winding riverbed scattered with rocks and overgrown with sagebrush. We pitched our little tent under a crooked pinon tree and built a small fire from twigs and dead grass. The night was cooler than we expected, the wind carrying distant howls we tried to laugh off as coyotes. Eleanor passed around a flashlight and dared us to tell our own scary stories. We tried, but none of them landed, not with the air so still, not with the woods pressing so close. It was Lucas who noticed it first. Our voices didn't echo like they normally would. The fire crackled, but the sound felt muffled, like something was absorbing it. That's when I realized the insects had gone silent. No crickets, no cicadas, just the fire. And something else. Somewhere beyond the bushes we heard a faint whistle. Not melodic, not human, just wrong. Darren grabbed a stick and stood up, trying to sound tough. Probably just the wind. But we all knew wind didn't whistle like that. Not in rhythm. Not 3 times in a row. We tried to shake it off, to act normal. But our laughter died quickly, swallowed by the hush around us. Eleanor dimmed the flashlight to conserve the battery, and the fire had started to dwindle. Darren threw on more dry brush, but the flames barely grew. That's when we saw it. Shapes moving just beyond the edge of the firelight, not animals. Too tall, too still. We stared for a full minute before Lucas whispered, "There's someone out there." But no one replied, because we all saw the same thing. Then a voice came from the darkness. It sounded like Elena's mom. "Elena, come home, Mika." But it was wrong. The tone was flat, hollow, like someone trying to remember how humans speak. Elena froze. "That's not her," she whispered, eyes wide. The voice repeated, louder, "Come home." Then another voice joined in, mimicking Darren's dad. "Boys, you're not supposed to be here." But Darren's dad was away in Albuquerque. We backed toward the tent as the voices grew louder, closer. But they weren't approaching like people. They were circling, echoing from all directions at once. We couldn't see anything clearly. only those shifting shadows and the glint of eyes too high off the ground to be human. Panic set in. Lucas tripped trying to unzip the tent, and we all stumbled inside, clawing for the flashlight, the matches, anything. But the zipper wouldn't close. It caught on fabric, jammed halfway. I turned, and through the opening I saw them. Figures now unmistakably close. Tall and emaciated, with skin that looked stretched too tight over brittle frames. Their limbs moved wrong, like they were learning how to walk as they moved, and their eyes, gleaming, lidless, fixed on us. Then the mimicry began again. "Lucas, it's cold," said a voice that sounded like his baby sister's. "Elena, please," came the voice of her dead grandfather. He'd passed 2 years earlier. The fire outside went out all at once, as if snuffed by something unseen. We were plunged into darkness, save for the beam of our flickering flashlight. One of the things stepped forward closer and bent its head at a disturbing angle. "You shouldn't be here," it rasped in a voice that sounded like all of us, combined. Elena screamed. Darren tried to swing a branch through the tent flap, but it passed through the air. The thing was gone. Then it appeared again, this time at the back of the tent, and something scratched at the canvas from above. I couldn't move, none of us could. The final straw came when we saw one of the creatures crawling on all fours around us, whispering our names in reverse, backwards, like a recording played wrong. It stopped at the front of the tent, leaned forward and smiled, a perfect copy of my mom's smile. We ran, into the dark, into anything but that. We didn't know where we were running, just that we had to get away. Branches tore at our skin, and rocks slid beneath our feet as we bolted through the arroyo, tripping and crashing into one another. Behind us, the voices chased us, echoing our names in warped, backward whispers, blending our families' tones with something ancient and dry like wind-scraping bone. I glanced back once and saw something crawling after us, too fast, too fluid. Its limbs bent the wrong way, and it moved like it was made of smoke and tendons. Somehow, by pure instinct or luck, we found the trail that led back to the reservation. As soon as our feet hit the old gravel road, the air changed. The voices stopped. The forest behind us stood still, as if nothing had happened. We didn't speak. We just walked until we saw the porch light at Elena's house. That light, warm, yellow, human, felt like salvation. But I knew we hadn't outrun it, only escaped its interest. For now. We never spoke of that night again. Not to our families, not to each other. It was an unspoken pact, sealed by fear and the knowledge that words couldn't explain what we saw. Summer ended and I returned to the city, but the dreams followed. Sometimes I hear the whistling again, 3 notes, always the same. Sometimes in the dark, I see a too tall silhouette just outside my window, standing too still. Years later, I messaged Elena to ask if she ever heard it again. She only replied with 3 words: "Don't answer it." Whatever we encountered in that arroyo didn't just mimic voices. It remembered names. It remembered us. And if you ever find yourself in the woods, hearing something familiar call from the dark, don't respond. Don't follow. Because what's calling you back might not be human. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.